All right, the other week we talked about rainwater collection and places in the world where it is illegal to do that. There's nowhere in the world where it's illegal to use solar power, but large-scale corporations are using their power to stop people from using solar power. So why would that be? Whilst I'm talking about that, I'm also going to finish off the deck area around the bathtub, and I'm also going to try and drag this massive tree out of the bush to use for firewood.
Governments talk a good game. They tell us to recycle, to go green, to save the planet. And then something strange happens.
It's the weekend, I should be relaxing, but instead I am doing something that's slightly stupid, potentially a little bit dangerous. Kind of interesting though. So there's some trees that I chopped down here. They're really heavy and the slope is really steep. And I thought, but they make great firewood, so I'm trying to see if I can get them out. The tree's down there, and I've got a chain block which I've kind of rigged up to this. You can just see that. So there's a big stump in the ground there. And I'm trying to just pull it up. I don't need to bring it that far. I just need to bring it far enough so I can cut it into smaller chunks and then lift it out.
In Alabama, people who installed solar panels found themselves slapped with a monthly fee, charged because they were producing their own power.
That chain block's got enough power to pretty much move an entire tree. So I've moved the tree further up the hill, chopped it into a small enough bit that I can now manually just yank it, and hopefully I can just sort of pull the bit that I've got up the slope and then maybe throw a rope down and get the rest of it. We'll see. This is already tiring me out. Man, it's such hard work. This may not be worth it, but whatever, man. It's a kind of interesting experiment. Either it will work and I'll do it again, or it's a waste of time, but let's see.
The case is still working its way through the courts. The question is simple. Can a utility company penalise you for not relying on them? This is not just a one-off. In California, the state quietly changed the rules, cutting the financial rewards for home solar energy by 75%. Overnight, the economics of going solar collapsed. Installations plummeted. And all over the place, there are laws forcing people to connect to the utility grid. It's an odd contradiction. On the one hand, governments encourage us to embrace renewable energy, and on the other, powerful interest seems to punish those who take it seriously. The question is not simply about solar panels, it's about freedom. Because when you can generate your own power, you are no longer a customer. You are no longer dependent. And systems, whether feudal, corporate, or political, are built on dependency. If you are not dependent, you are by default independent, free. To see how we got here, it's useful to look back. Once upon a time, we were born to the land that we didn't own. The land was owned by a lord who collected taxes from us and in turn paid those taxes to a king. But then came a shift. Revolutions, republics, democracy. The idea that freedom was possible, that a person could own land, that we could build homes, grow food, raise our families independent from the whims of royalty or the church. In In the 19th and 20th centuries, states and municipalities started building out the infrastructure of modern life. Electricity grids, water supply systems, sewer systems, telephones. We were then dependent on those systems, but in a sense, we owned them. We paid for them with our taxes. I was a kid in the 1980s, but I clearly remember Margaret Thatcher selling off these utilities to private companies. And in the US, Ronald Reagan was paving the way for a new era. Services once built for the public good were turned into products for profit. Maybe this was a sleight of hand. Noam Chomsky probably thinks so. To quote him, that's the standard technique of privatization. Defund, make sure things don't work, people get angry, you hand it over to private capital. So the infrastructure hasn't changed, but the ownership has. I think the problem with this is companies are at their core profit-making entities. If a company spends a large amount of money to build and then maintain an infrastructure of, say, power stations and power lines, it will want to keep its customer base. As technology improves and people start making their own power from the sun, these companies will do what they can to prevent that.
When we bought the bus, I gutted the entire thing because it was in a bit of a state. But the one bit of it that I kept was the bathroom. And the reason that I kept that was because it was a kind of an all-in-one fiberglass unit, and I just thought that might be useful. However, after living in it for a bit, I thought I never want to use an indoor bathroom. So since we're not going to use it, I thought let's turn it into something useful. This is what I've come up with. It's basically a walk-in wardrobe. So there will be a clothes rail going across the top and shelves down either side, and there's a door in the middle. That is the plan. But the first thing, I've got to clean it out because it's just full of junk.
The idea that large-scale corporations will use their power and their political connections against the individual in order to force them to use a utility system that they once owned might sound like some harebrained conspiracy theory, but it really isn't. It's just economics. But here's the thing. I want to be careful here not to set up a dichotomy between oppressed and oppressor. The CEO of any private utility company will argue the reason for their actions is that they are governed by a board of directors and they are beholden to shareholders. Shareholders want the price of their stock to appreciate, and so CEOs are duty bound to keep this system intact. couple of years ago, the FTSE 100 looked like it was priced a little low, and so I bought a few shares in an ETF. So if a utility company were to try to prevent my use of solar, am I the oppressed or the oppressor or both? As I see it, the issue is not with any one individual. The issue is with the system and the way things are done. Tony Benn, who was a famous politician from my childhood and an opponent of Thatcher, once said, "The key issue in all politics is the distribution of power. If you can't control your utilities, then who's really in charge?" So right now, we might be going through a transitional stage. Power has shifted from kings and lords to governments to private corporations, and now it's heading to the individual. Private corporations might try to control their customers through legal cases or mandatory grid connection laws, but to me these actions look like a dying animal wildly flailing about trying to do everything they can to survive, but they'll probably lose the battle. An energy company could supply the warmth I want for winter in a far more efficient way than I am demonstrating here. But there's a satisfaction I derive from this that runs deeper than efficiency.
There's easier ways than that to get firewood in the world, but I sort of enjoyed it. The chain block thing that I was winding, that didn't really work. That's not really the right tool for the job in the end. It sort of, it can lift an enormous amount, but it's really designed for lifting an enormous amount short distances, probably for like taking engines out of cars and things like that. So I'll have to keep thinking on that one. Maybe a winch might be better. I don't know, have a think. I don't claim to have any of the answers on this stuff. I'm just kind of thinking out loud and asking a few questions. So if you've got some opinions, I'd love to hear them. Chuck them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. See ya next week.